right, everybody. I'm here with a special guest, Brad, and we're going to be talking about Nico. Brad, thanks for coming on. Before we start, why don't you let everybody know who you are, where to find your work, etc.
Yeah, so my name is Brad, otherwise known as Bradcifer. You can find me on pretty much all types of social media, whether it's Twitter, YouTube, all that good stuff underneath that same name, Bradcifer. Pretty easy, do all the YouTube stuff, and I, of course, write articles here on CCG, and I love Marvel Snap. Very easy to kind of get into.
Nice, like it. So you and I, like I mentioned, are going to be talking about Nico, and in the background here, we've got Brad's article that by the time you see this video, or shortly after, this article will be out. So get ready. There's going to be a lot more information in the article you're going to want to check out. I'm here to sort of get Brad's feeling. So you don't think Nico sucks, huh? Tell me some thoughts.
No, so I think when I first saw her, my initial reaction was pretty much similar to a lot of people, in which it's like, you know, the utility seems to be there. There seems to be some, you know, synergies with what she can do, but the randomness kind of scares me a little bit. But once you kind of dig into it, you know that the randomness, it's been confirmed that it's once per game that these will show up. So you won't have repeats of the 7 spells. So that's actually pretty big. So you have a chance to pretty much see them all. You don't have a chance of, you know, getting the move one twice or 3 times in a single game. That would be awful. But I do think she reminds me of Thanos and all the stones, in that they do offer this great utility. Now, from a 1-to-1 ratio, I don't think she's as good as the stones, simply because those draw you a card, or at least 4 of them do, right?
Right.
But there is one of them that does draw you 2 cards, and a lot of these can have these really interesting niche interactions and like different variations of what's going on based on the board state. I mean, look at Snowguard, look at things like Legion, look at all these kind of cards, and they offer utility, but they're not always going to be played every single game that you see them in hand.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And, you know, I've got the ability showing on the screen right now. And for anybody, we're not going to spend a lot of time, like, this isn't a Nico guide or anything like that, but she casts a spell after you play her. She can become a demon. She can destroy, draw 2 cards, move a card to the right, give a card 2 power. Let's see, play a card, replace a location, Scarlet Witch effect, add a copy of a card to your hand, add, or double this card's power. And I think you wanted to make a comment a little bit about making sure people understood something with that.
Yeah, so when it comes to the double this card's power, when it says this card, it's actually referring to Nico herself. So her power is the one that gets doubled. It is not a, you know, Shuri type of an effect at just a 1 cost, which, you know, I, on one hand, a little sad about. On the other hand, I'm kind of relieved, because that's that high roll. If you're both playing Nico and then your opponent gets the great double hit on a Shuri effect, but you don't, that could make or break a game.
Yeah, that could be huge. I would see a lot of people screaming about that a little bit, even though. So, I mean, your concept of when you first look at the card, I had the, I think, same initial reaction was, wait a minute, this is just too RNG for me. And I just thought, like, nah, this isn't gonna work. I can't, it's too random. And then I started looking at it a little bit, and I think a lot of what you're saying, and we're gonna get into some of the decks that you bring up here, and I'd love to hear some more about it. But I think that there's a lot of spells here. The way I broke it down was, well, these spells work with almost anything. And then these couple maybe are a little bit more niche. But generally speaking, I think most of her spells, I think if I was to look at these, maybe the move to the right might be the most niche, maybe.
Yeah, and I don't think it's easy to just say one is the worst or like the other. I think they're all very, you know, situational and dependent on what's going on with your board state. I mean, look, the games in which you have Sanctum on the right hand side of the board, and you have this spell pop up, that's fantastic. That makes it the best one for that game.
That's
right?
a great point.
So it's that utility of what it offers, and you know, that's going to be, I think, what makes or breaks the card. And the fact that you have a chance to see most of these spells in any given game because they don't repeat, I think is very important for people to keep in mind.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with that. And the flexibility there, and the fact that she's 1 cost, it makes it so that she can fit in basically almost any turn. So it can be really easy to play based on, like you said, whatever the RNG of those spells are. So I appreciate any other high level thoughts on Nico before we jump into some of the specific decks that you've got here.
Yeah, to kind of build upon what you just said about her being a one cost, it's just when I talk about her having insane utility, it's not just the effects, it's the fact that being a one cost allows her to essentially act as a glue for your entire deck. How often do you have games in which it doesn't matter how well dispersed your curve is, how perfect it is in terms of what Marvel Snap wants you to do? You will have games where you just kind of have awkward turns where you don't quite draw the right thing at the right time, and you're playing a 3-drop on 4, and unless you're playing high evo, you really don't want to be wasting the energy for each turn. You want to be efficient.
Right.
She can be that glue to hold together a certain turn and really just change the course of the game, whereas without her, you would have lost out on that energy anyway, and the value that some of these spells can offer in those instances can be just insane.
I totally agree. One of the spells that was up that I think is going to be really, really strong is after you play your next card, add a copy of it to your hand.
Yes.
I just think especially with some of the metas that are going on right now, we'll talk about that deck a little bit in a bit, but there's just having multiple of those is a lot of fun. So, all right. So the first deck you've got here is sort of Destroy. So I love your thoughts. I'm going to hit the high level, Deadpool, Forge, and Nico together. And then generally Demons and Venom, just yes. So talk to me a little bit about your thoughts with Destroy and what led you to this one being, I mean, when I read it, I didn't necessarily think it was your favorite, but the fact that it was first, I was like, well, maybe it's one of the top ones that he's thinking about.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily my favorite of the bunch, though I do think it's the one that has, purely from a synergistic standpoint, the best chance of being successful, right, when it comes to Nico. I go on to say that there are essentially, at the worst, 4 abilities that Nico has that are just great for Destroy. Yeah. And one of those you already touched on, which is the add a copy to your hand. If you're playing a Destroy deck, how often do you sit there and go, oh, cloning vats, I'm just going to throw Venom into it over and over again, and you're just like, this is amazing. Now, it's no cloning vats, of course, but being able to let Venom flip, eat a card or a handful of cards like a Wolverine or a Deadpool in this case, Nova, whatever, gain all the stats, and then get the copy to your hand just like cloning vats, that again is something that could make or break the game, because you go from having just a 3/3 that becomes a 3/7 or 3/8 to now a 3/3 that goes to a 3/7 or 3/8, and you have another one in hand. Right. And then Deadpool came back in hand and he's like a 1/4 or something like that. And like it lines up nicely. But otherwise, you have a bunch of other ones as well. Like, of course, there's the destroy this card and draw 2, or destroy that card and draw 2, which has wonderful synergistic qualities with things like Nova, things like Deadpool, stuff like that. And even, honestly, the Demon one, I find to be one of the probably most underrated aspects of Nico for any deck, because the Demon turning a card into it, right? When you play next card, it becomes a demon. Yeah. A lot of times people are like, well, that's just kind of maybe the worst one. It's just generic, whatever. I've drawn Deadpool on like turn 6, or I've drawn Sunspot or Nebula, or like even a Carnage, because in a Destroy deck, if you want to stay on topic with that, sometimes you draw Carnage, you've already done all your destroying and you're not in a position to eat anything, because then you lose value.
Right.
But though there is I think an instance of where it depends on how this works, because if it works like Elsa and her trigger, where it becomes a demon as it's still technically flipped over and flips up as a demon, awesome. At least with the Carnage example. Yeah. With Sunspot, like that's still fine. But if Carnage flips up and reveals first and then eats something and then becomes a demon, it's worse. Right, so we have to see how that works.
So my understanding, and I don't know this for certain, I think I read it somewhere on, I don't know if it was a Discord or something, is that the on reveal happens first. And so the Carnage example would be a bad one, but the Deadpool on turn 6 is a great one, or it's, maybe, I don't know, it's Forge. So Forge is a perfect use. So he does his thing, feeds the other card that you're going to use, and then it's a demon. And then you can Venom it, so you get that's what's that essentially a 1 + 6, 8, so it's like, that's a strong play there, just with Nico. So, and then, obviously Venom gets the points from it, etc. So I mean, we'll see for sure if that's how it shakes out, but yeah, I agree with you. I think that demon, it can be a lot. And I love your idea with Venom and the cloning of that, because you're right. That is cloning vats. Every time someone's got destroyed and you've got Venom, you're like, oh, this is gonna be fun. This is gonna be so fun, because it just gets so big.
Yeah, like it's like Bar Sinister, stuff like that. Like it gives me like the semblance of that. And then like, it does actually, that is an interesting thing. Playing the spells on Bar Sinister when those come up, depending on the spell, that could get crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're running Killmonger, so you have ways to kind of kill her and fill your space up again. And there's a lot of utility here, and it's not just destroy.
I agree. So transition to the next one perfectly. Phoenix. Tell me a little bit about why. Obviously, Phoenix is, what's the right way to say this? Has been, I don't want to say controversial card, but maybe a card that, I mean, I personally liked it when I was playing the multiple man thing, but I'd say a lot of people didn't like it. So maybe it was controversial, but what made you lean into the Phoenix Force type of deck?
Well, so the same idea where Nico has a lot of abilities that work great with Destroy. Well, she does have that one ability that we talked about being the most niche, and that's the move ability.
Okay.
Well, what deck wants to play both Destroy synergies and move synergies? It's Phoenix. Also, I just like to point out how amazing and wonderful my name for this deck is, 1980 Pontiac Firebird, because all I think of whenever I see this deck, that's all I can think of.
That's awesome.
But anyway, it's just, again, those same qualities and the synergies that we touched on with Destroy. Nico brings that to the table, but also can have that little bit of move synergy.
Yeah.
And also another deck with Forge, because actually Forge made this deck a bit better as well, because now you have the option on one to go Forge into multiple man and then destroy it, then into Phoenix. Same thing could be with Nico could, maybe you get the buff, the +2, which essentially is another Forge effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
What Nico provides. Or you just get the high roll and you hit the destroy the next card you play, and it you draw 2 cards.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that. I drew Phoenix Force. Needed that one.
Right.
So it adds this extra utility to the deck, and just the fact that you have 5 out of 7 synergistic qualities of her abilities with this deck is nothing short than awesome to me.
I would agree with that. And I was thinking about a Phoenix Force deck for Nico myself because of the same similar reasons. I did not have Forge in mind though, and I want to relook at it now, looking at yours and going, this makes a lot of sense and this needs to be in there. I think the potential point gains there, it's too much. You don't want to pass it by.
Yeah. And there's a lot of play with these decks. Like Ghost Spider is awesome in these kind of decks, but also I could see her getting cut for just a little extra piece. So maybe you want to throw Carnage back in, so you have 3 pieces of destroy effects rather than just 2. I'd actually probably lean into that direction. I think that's my first look at is cutting Ghost Spider and bringing back in Carnage.
What's your thought on Iron Fist and Phoenix Force lists? You like that, or does it get too clunky sometimes?
It's not my favorite, just because I think it creates these awkward spots where, I don't know, the value presents isn't as good as what I would like it to be. And also, anytime you add more, plays in which you have to think of them through a bit more. And again, it's as simple as just moving a card over, right? But for sometimes when you're playing the game and you get ahead of yourself and you're trying to think of what you're doing the next turn, the turn after that, you might misjudge what you're doing. And then you're like, oh, I just set up my multiple man to be in the same lane as these other 2 cards. And when I destroy them, now Phoenix has a chance to pull back the Iron Fist, and that just feels bad. Yeah. I want it to be a bit more linear to that sense, to give you the lines that are the most visible and easy to manipulate yourself, with the higher floor to not hurt yourself.
That makes sense. I've definitely played a card and be like, oh, that's right, I Iron Fisted last, I forgot. Yeah. And that's just a turn upon a turn. You'd think, how did you forget that? But I 100% have done it. Another question with this deck, because playing the multiple man Phoenix, I do like Heimdall a bit though. What's your thoughts on, I mean, obviously you've leaned a little bit more into the Taskmaster copy, which obviously Human Torch get huge. What's your thought on potentially having a Heimdall here?
I don't mind it. So you could see the way that I think the early game is pretty much set in stone, right? I think you should be doing, Forge and Destroy effects, and then Human Torch, Multiple Man, probably Nico, right? I think that's what you should work with.
Yeah.
The late game, and of course Phoenix Force, by the way, the late game where I have Shuri, Taskmaster, Nimrod, and Vision, that's just the late game that I felt the one that I was most comfortable with is like my plan B, right? Because if I'm going to play Shuri, and Nimrod has the grace energies in there anyway. Well, what else is good with Shuri? Well, Vision's fantastic to dodge Alioth. You could do Red Skull instead if you want to go do a typical one, and then have Taskmaster be able to copy the Vision or the Red Skull. You could also just cut out the Shuri Nimrod stuff in general and go a bit more move heavy. Let the Destroy stuff fall to the wayside a bit and just be your backup plan. And maybe you're primarily a deck that wants to focus on good move synergies. And in that case, maybe Iron Fist can come into the fold because you're doing more things like maybe Vulture, Doctor Strange, and Heimdall to your point, to where now the move synergies is your plan A and the Destroy Phoenix Force is plan B. So it all depends on how you construct the deck and what direction you want to go into, but always understand what your main game plan is and then what your supporting game plan is, and know how to pivot and find those exact pivot points for when you're playing a deck.
I like it. And I do like I'm a big fan of the Shuri Nimrod plays in general. And I like that that's kind of a nice backup there where, especially if for some reason some of that Phoenix Force doesn't play out, you can always Shuri, Nimrod, Venom, whatever your other Destroy card is. And you've got two pretty solid lanes there. So I love that. I love that. The other deck, we're going to scroll down quite a bit here. We'll come back to one of the points. Is you've got some Surf and Turf version 1, and I think a version 2. Let's just start looking at version 1. I love that you're looking ahead in general. You've got some stuff in here about looking at cards to come. Werewolf by Night, and you even went into, I think it was December with Shaw. Talk about this a little bit with, I mean, however you want to sort of approach these Surfer decks, but I wanted to make sure that we highlighted that at some point because I thought it was a genius bring up.
Yeah, so again, I know I'm seemingly using Forge a lot here with Nico, but I really think they go hand in hand because now you're having an option to double up on a potential effect. Nico has a Forge effect built in, and Forge himself is just, in a good spot right now because of this change with different decks. And I like the idea of going into this little bit of a move synergy with Silk and Kraven in your early game because you got Spider-Man, got Polaris, and then you even got Juggernaut, stuff like that, which could help you out if you hit something out of a Storm lane and it goes into the Kraven, more power. I just like the way it falls together and it just kind of works out. Of course, you can just be more traditional in your list and just cut out the little move stuff. Maybe you bring back Brood. Maybe you do the thing where you want to go into Magic, into Absman, like Surfer on turn 7 kind of thing. There's a lot of ways to work with it, but I think what is important is that glue aspect we talked about. Nico presents that pretty nicely with this deck because you have a lot of 3-drops. And how many times on 4 do you play a 3-drop and you're like, well, I got nothing else to do. Now you have, a little bit more flexibility in what Nico can present. Which is nice because Nico doesn't have to be a turn 1 play. She is a 1-drop. But that doesn't mean you play her on 1.
Right.
If you have her in your opening hand and you look at what she is offering for her spell for that turn, and you're like, yeah, I'm not really feeling that one right now. Cool, move on. You'll get to her eventually. She can present something that you can find useful. It doesn't have to be done on 1, and this is a great deck to take advantage of, like those little flex spots.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize that point that the way I look at Nico is absolutely not a turn 1 card. I mean, I'm not saying you can't play it on turn 1, but it's one of those cards that it's like you definitely want to wait and see. Like you've got to know your high roll and you've got to know your low roll, and you've got to be fine sitting until turn 4, 5, and 6 and playing that card. And if it doesn't hit on 4, 5, 6, just move on. And it's kind of like, okay. And honestly, that card, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too much, but that really hopefully will help people playing it learn that sometimes you just walk away from games too. So if someone snaps at you and you want to retreat, it's quite okay. But I don't know what your position is on that. I don't necessarily, not trying to tangent there, but as you were saying that, I was like, oh, you know what? This concept of, not playing Nico on 1 really sort of ties into the larger concept of Marvel Snap and knowing when to retreat. So anyway.
Which is a valuable skill to have. The best players have it. If you are someone that hits infinite all the time, or you're, looking at these streamers that are in the top 1,000 or 500 players on the ladder, or they have all these crazy infinite borders and stuff. It's because, and especially in Conquest, they're effective at retreating and knowing when to, take your punches and, lose the battle but not the war.
Yep, I totally agree. So it looked like when I looked at the second version of this is when you brought in the Werewolf by Night and the Sebastian Shaw. So yeah, I said I wanted to hear from you about this. Let's hear about it. What do you got going on here?
I love these two cards. I'm so excited for them. Sebastian Shaw, by the way, we will talk about this, I guess, in a second, but I have this part in the article where I talk about how players are evaluating cards wrong. And I'll touch on that a little bit now, I guess. And Sebastian Shaw is a great example. For those who don't know, he is a 3/3. He's going to be the season pass for December. And as it stands right now, he could be subject to change, of course. But as it stands right now, he's a 3/3 that says anytime he permanently gains power, things like Ironheart, Okoye, Nova exploding, that kind of thing. No matter where he is, he will gain an additional +2 in that sense. So that's also in deck. So Okoye is great. In hand, Nakia. That's awesome. And you know what's going to happen? People are going to play with this card right when they get him, and they're going to be like, okay, Okoye, Nova, Killmonger, Nakia, and do Ironheart, like Wong stuff, and do all these things because they really want to get that power and the value out of Shaw. Yeah. Which there is something to be had there. Just throw everything at a wall, see what synergies you like the most, and then start cutting from there. That's fine. But that doesn't mean that's what the end goal of the deck is going to be. Yeah. Very simple. We have Surfer giving the extra +2 to him, and honestly, and even like things like Nico and Forge, and that is honestly enough. You can maybe fit in a Nova Killmonger package in here, or Nakia herself. You can cut Sarah, for example, if you feel like Mobius is a bit too oppressive in your pocket meta. Bring in Nakia. That's fine. You don't need to throw everything at the wall to see if something sticks. Yeah. Just a couple of synergistic qualities, and he's going to be fantastic in Surfer. And on top of that, I had the move synergies with the previous deck. Werewolf by Night is going to be awesome with the little move synergies, because look at how many on reveals Surfer has.
Yeah, I was looking at those. It's like almost all of them, a lot of them at least.
Yeah, it's 9 or I guess 8, not counting Werewolf. Yeah, because it's the only ones that don't are going to be Silk. No, Craven as well. Sorry. So Silk, Craven, Jeff, and Sarah. Yeah. But that's in this build. You can definitely make it in a way where you can get more hits. But I don't think you need to. It just happens to be a 3-drop, happens to be able to bounce around. Well, and because at some point the lanes are going to get full, right? So you can on reveal in a spot and he's not going to be able to move. So I mean, you've got some pretty maximized potential with this as far as the on reveals go. I like it a lot. So very good. Any other surfer thoughts? I want to hit you with a couple cards / decks before we kind of get into your what players are doing wrong spots, which I know a lot of people are interested in. But anything else surfer wise? Play more Surfer. I think it's an underrated deck at the moment. Maybe Sarah's not the way to go because of Mobius. I'm not finding Mobius to be as awful, and I think his play rate's gone down a teeny tiny bit as people are getting more settled in. But it's a great deck. Surfer is still very powerful, and there's a plethora of good 3-drops, both now and looking forward. I agree. So, all right. So a couple decks / maybe not decks, but we'll call a couple key pieces I wanted to throw by you. Okay. I have not said anything about these, so this is hot takes. First one, bounce, specifically with Falcon, Angie, Elsa, Kitty. Just the idea of Nico multiple times in a game. The copy card I mentioned earlier, getting multiple Elsas, Sinister London. I envision getting 14-point Nightcrawler type stuff, which could be a lot of fun, especially if you copy it and bounce it. What are your thoughts on that in general? I think it bounces a really cool spot for her. The only thing bounce is so tough to kind of figure out as an archetype, because it kind of in the same vein as Destroy. They might have an overabundance of choice that can be overwhelming. Yeah. Okay. Where you have so many great options. Like even honestly, like one thing of bounce that I've even enjoyed was like the Hawkeye when he got buffed, and Medusa when she got buffed. I think those are great to get back in hand with like things like Beast. Yeah. There's absolutely something to be to be toyed around there with Nico and Bounce. I think that's a fantastic home for her, especially like you said, with Falcon being able to bring her back, the copying effect with Elsa, Beast being able to bounce her back, stuff like that, and then being able to continue cycling through your other spells, and that you've already cycled through these 3 spells. You're like, okay, I have a chance next turn to hit this spell or this spell or this spell, which is also something to keep in mind. The same way we look at these trackers, or if you keep track of the deck that you're running, and you're like, okay, I have a chance to hit these cards. How many times do you make a play based on the fact of what percentage you have of hitting next card in your deck?
Yeah.
Nico can be the same exact way of like, okay, what if I make this play because next turn I want to keep this space open for the chance to hit this effect with her? I have a 50-50 chance based on the way the game's going. Like, there's a lot of interest in that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That's definitely one of the decks that, whenever I do a video that week on the deck for this specific card or certain decks, that's going to be one I'm going to try and see how it goes. So I was just curious on your take there. This next one might be a little bit more of a stretch, but it hit me with the destroy and draw 2. Because I think a lot of the cards that Nico plays into, honestly, are just, or the spells she plays into, they can go anywhere. And then I saw that and I was like, I wonder if this could work with Dino, like some sort of like, you know what, I'm going to play. And this part is too narrow. I'm saying this up front, but I think that it can be a little bit more besides this because it keeps filling your deck or your hand. Is you can play like an Agent 13 on turn 6, destroy it, get 2 cards plus the Agent 13 card if you've got Dino on board. Now, I don't know if that's enough to say, yeah, let's try to make a deck around Dino with this. But again, leaning into some of the facts that I think her spells are flexible, how quick would you be looking to make a Dino deck with her?
Looking at a Dino deck is interesting because I'm trying to think of the other cards you play to support Dino. I mean, Loki's probably in there, Collector's probably in there, things like Agent Coulson, the new Maria Hill. It's a lot of effects in which it just adds stuff to your hand. And there's not a whole lot of supporting stuff beyond that type of effect for most things, besides a tech card here and there of like Shang-Chi or like Cosmo to protect your your Collector, your Devil Dino for that matter. So the way I would look at it is when you're looking at the way or to evaluate where Nico could fit in is think of like the ceiling that you want, which is like what you painted it, like with like the late game draw 2 kind of thing. Keep in mind that is a 1 in 7 chance of you hitting it in general. Also, even the math of getting into it is specifically on turn 6, it gets even more rough. So now let's figure out, okay, where does she fit in to support the rest of the cards beyond just random niche, moments in the game. And I'm struggling to find where those moments are with the supporting cast, because most of them are just on reveal, something goes to your hand, right? Or on reveal, do something to your opponent with these couple of tech cards. That's where I'm trying to find. You want something there for synergies. And also, I think Dino's a deck that is very, very good at curving out efficiently. So where's the glue spots for her to fit in? Again, we talked about earlier, you're going to run into these awkward games no matter what, no matter how well your deck is at curving. But Surfer is one of those where you're definitely going to have gaps in most games. Dino, I think, is going to be less likely to have those gaps.
I could see that. I would tend to agree. So I scrolled down to a move because there's another card that it doesn't get as much play as Dino, or nowhere near as much Dino, but again, it's niche as far as the move to the right. I was thinking about Spider-Man 2099. And, you had some move in there, and I was like, did you give any thought to seeing if he could fit in a deck anywhere with Nico?
I mean, I think he definitely could. If you already have move synergies going in there and she just kind of works out into that regard, sure. Okay. I don't see a problem with that. And again, move is another one of those decks that's not super amazing at curving out efficiently. Maybe turns 5 and 6 are pretty simple with things like, Vision or Heimdall. But your early game has a lot of 3s and 2s and stuff thrown in there where it's like you can just kind of mix and match some things. So she can definitely have potential to kind of fit in those gaps. And I think Spider-Man 2099 in general is a card that I know people want to see him buffed in some way, shape, or form, but he already is one of last 3 or 4 4/6s in the game. It's what him, Iron Lad, the cow, Hell Cow, and White Queen.
Yep.
Are those it?
I think. I mean, it's cost to power ratio top tier. You know, as far as 4 costs go, for sure. There's no doubt about it. So yeah, no, I would agree. And I was wondering about that one a little bit. You got to be careful with them. I mean, I'll say it anywhere on a video or YouTube or Twitter or whatever, that I would like to see him buffed a little bit, but what it would be if you went, let's just say hypothetically, destroy at 2 locations. Well, you got to take a lot of power off then. You know what I mean? You can't be destroying 2 cards and have a 4/6. That's just ridiculous. But having said that, I'm curious to see if my gut tells me he might be a little clunky unless you're leaning very into move with Nico. But I'm curious to see how many people sort of try that avenue as well.
As long as you have multiple ways to get him moving, like Nico, Ghost Spider, maybe Doctor Strange, because I mean, by the time you play Doctor Strange after him, there's a very good chance, because he's a 4/6, he is your highest powered card, unless you've really ramped up Kraven or maybe Cloak. Or not Cloak, I'm sorry, Dagger.
Oh, yeah. But Cloak is another card that could bring him to you.
That too.
You know, so it's kind of like, okay. So the last deck that I want to bring up, mainly you mentioned earlier, with the thought of Nico being like Thanos and the Stones. What about combining those? Putting Nico in a Thanos deck.
I have thought about that. I do really like it. It's just I'm trying to understand or figure out what direction we take Thanos. Are we doing the ramp kind of thing of like playing Psylocke because you have the time stone into like your bunch of different 5-drops like Professor X, Claw, Blue Marvel? Are we doing that route? We're doing a destroy Thanos list. We're trying to get rid of the stones, and which that one probably makes a bit more sense because of the synergies that she already brings to the table in that regard. I think there's a lot of different ways you can go about her. I think that's the beauty of this card too, because yes, you want to find those synergistic qualities, but that doesn't make or break the card, in my opinion, because enough of these abilities are impactful enough in most decks where if you can find that spot to slot her in, I think the biggest part is, rather than focus so much on the synergistic qualities of what she brings to each deck, focus on how often do you have those gaps of like 1 energy floating, 2 energy floating, and she can be that glue. I think that's where she thrives. But Thanos, I mean, why not? It sounds fun.
Yeah, I agree with you. And we're going to get to the last point, the part that I wanted to bring up, where we were talking about how players evaluate cards. And my general opinion on Nico, I think I said at the beginning, I'm going to say it now, and I'm going to keep saying it, is that I think she's a good card. I think everybody should get her. Yeah. I think that the part that I love about her is you don't look at her and go, this, I mean, we've had a lot of really strong cards lately, a lot. And people are swinging to the other end of the spectrum on their opinions with Nico, saying that she's trash. She's the worst card potentially out there, And while I think you and I both disagree with that sentiment, I think that she is one of those cards that is going to be, it's like, I don't see an OTA for her ever. I think she just fits so well with what she does. And once I think people figure out sort of where to put her, it's just going to feel, it's like a good feel-good card that fits well. Before we hit your last point, what's that last point that I wanted to bring up that you have in the article? What's your thought on how she could fit in that regard?
Just in the meta in general,
or just like the concept of being a card it doesn't necessarily blow you away, but it just fits. It just works. It's like it's dialed in perfectly. The way they've made this is, I don't want to say perfect card, but the way it's made is perfect. It'll fit nicely. I mean,
she's certainly the most interesting card as far as design goes that we've ever had in the game. And I really think that she very well could be, like you said, in this like great sweet spot of like, she doesn't need to get touched ever. We'll have to see how it goes. We'll have to keep an eye on it. I wouldn't be shocked if some things got changed down the road because, she's being undervalued, right? And like some things are just way better than we thought on paper or whatever. So I don't know. Maybe even down the road, there's like a slight rework where they remove maybe 1 or 2 of these abilities to give her a bit more consistency. I could see that happening.
That's fair.
She has these similar to like what they talk about with like Galactus, based on his rework, they have a knob to change around. I think she has something similar. It's just on a different, axis. And I think, as from what I can see so far and what I've kind of, based on the work on the article and stuff like that and just talking things through, I do think she's pretty close to being a home run hit.
Yeah, I agree with you. All right, so this, I've got it up on the screen. You make a comment in here about how all players evaluate, or how some, not all players, how players evaluate all cards in the wrong manner. Yeah, I want to hear a little bit about this and what your thoughts are here.
Yeah, so I touched on this a little bit when I was talking about Shaw, right? Talking about that earlier, how, like, it's going to be so easy to just be like, yeah, play Okoye, play Nakia, play all these cards. They're just like, really get the use out of them. But at the end of the day, Surfer and like a Nova with a Killmonger, or Nakia, and just those two cards in this deck are enough to be good enough to make him a staple on that deck. I bring up Man-Thing in the article where, yeah, your first instinct is, to play him in Junk, right? Where you're just kind of clog your opponent's board, and you do have a bit more agency in that because you're controlling what goes where and that kind of thing. But Junk is one of those decks where it can be really clunky, like really clunky. And that's fine. It doesn't have to be a top tier number one deck. But oftentimes you can just win without Man-Thing too, because of the way the deck kind of functions and just the nature of saying you can't play cards anymore because it's full on the side. If you give them a bunch of rocks on one side and a hood, and then you Viper over, either hood or, like, of course, if you're playing Sentry, that void, then the Man-Thing is kind of negligible at that point. Yeah. But he can also just be played as a 4/5, and your opponent does the work for you. How many times do you see cards played on 1, 2, and 3 that are in those veins? Or let's say you play Storm, for example, because a place that I've really liked Man-Thing is behind Storm in a Storm lane. Sure, you wash Storm away to being a 0. That's fine. But how often do you see on turn 4, if you played Storm on curve, your opponent goes 2/2 drops, or a 1-drop, a 1-drop, and a 2-drop, or a 1-drop and a 2-drop, but not a 4-drop?
Yeah,
I see it a lot. And it's very easy for that to be the case. And being able to just effectively be a 5/9 or a 5/7 behind a Storm lane, or a 4/9, I apologize, is really impactful.
Yeah.
And that is something you have to keep in mind with these cards, is when you're evaluating them, they don't need to be perfect synergistic cards with every aspect of your deck.
Yeah.
Because honestly, if that's a deck that exists, something's going to get changed out of it eventually. If it's perfectly synergistic all the time, every single time, it's too good, and it'll get changed.
Yep.
The other side of it that I talk about in this part too is the amount you play a card makes people evaluate things differently. I mentioned specifically Nico very well could be a card that you play 30% of the time. She sits in your hand 70% of the time, or you just don't draw that game. She's not alone in that, by the way. There are plenty of cards that have this type of utility to them. One that I go to is Professor X. Mm-hmm. Professor X, I feel, is a card that's
a good point.
Probably, half the time, a little less than half the time, you'll be able to play him because either, the opportunity cost isn't there, right? Because he's a 5/3 and you haven't set up your board in the proper way, or your opponent's played in the right way to keep you from doing so. So he's a wash. Can't play him. Well, is he a useless card now because you couldn't play him in those instances when your opponent did the right thing or you did the wrong thing? Yeah. Well, no. He's just a card that has his utility and his spots in which he's amazing. Nico is the same way, because when you do play Professor X and he sticks and he's the correct play, do you probably win that game, right? Nico, I think, is in the same vein of, you may not play her 70% of the game. It might be closer to 50-50, but let's say I like to aim for a higher negative spot first. Okay. Because if I feel like I can overcome this massive differential between 70 and 30% in my mind of how good a card can be, then I think that's a good indicator of the card's strength.
Okay.
So if I can only play Nico 30% of the time, But those 30% of those games, I'm usually winning because she was so impactful thanks to her utility and what she offered, or she changed a simple 3-drop on 4 into a 3-drop plus her, drawing me 2 cards or giving it +2 power or moving into a sanctum that my opponent couldn't get to because they already played Jeff earlier and moved it because before it revealed or something. Then that's massive.
Yeah.
And people think too much about the synergistic qualities of a card and the fact that they feel like they should play it every time. And oftentimes people force themselves to play a card when it's unoptimal. Like if I'm playing 2 4-drops in a deck and I'm playing like Man-Thing and like Stegron, right?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to force Man-Thing every single time because it's the hot new toy.
Right.
And I'm losing games, I'm going to be like, wow, Man-Thing is horrible. He's lost me so many games.
Yeah.
But he's not the correct play all the time.
Right.
But that's okay. He doesn't have to be.
Right.
If he was, he'd be too strong.
Right.
So that's what I mean when I think people evaluate cards wrong. Yes, synergies are important. Yes, knowing when to play a card and being able to play it and be a good card is important. But that's not the end-all be-all, and it's much more nuanced than just that.
Yeah. One of the things I thought of, and I was curious to hear your point on, when I read that, I was thinking about focusing on strong, what I'd call pockets of cards. Mm-hmm. And I'm making up numbers, but 2 or 3 cards are like, these are good together. Well, and they curve well together with this pocket of cards, which curves together. And so you've got these basic pockets. Is that, I'm going to say, I don't want to say a dumber way to say it, but a dumber way to say it, you know what I mean? Where it's just like, is that sort of like a way I could look at it if I'm building?
Yeah. So I come from both Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh's backgrounds. Okay. And in Yu-Gi-Oh specifically, what you're describing is referred to as an engine.
Okay.
I'm running X deck. It's like I'm running, to put it in Snap terms, I'm running a Destroy deck with a small move engine. Okay. Or I'm running a Darkhawk deck with a Black Bolt Stature engine.
Okay.
Right? It's these little, it's this extra cog piece to the machine that's going to make you win games. It might not be exactly synergistic with the rest of your deck. That's okay, because you have these little things that are good enough independently, and you can go into them. One of my favorite things, like when I was talking about like plan A and plan B and being able to identify that earlier with things like Phoenix Force.
Yeah.
Living Tribunal is the one that I love. I do one of the podcasts was a Snap on Ego with Chris Bootman, and he tried picking up Living Tribunal, and I had in my build Hela and MODOK, and this was right after he got buffed, and he's like, I can't win, like they keep stopping my MODOK, keep stopping my Hela, and I'm like, because you're thinking about it wrong. You're trying to shoehorn and make the MODOK Hela work.
Yeah,
they're the plan B. You need to focus on your ramp with like Electro and stuff like that, and just getting into your Iron Man, Living Tribunal, and then Onslaught kind of plays. And then if you have the opportunity to go MODOK behind, Invisible Woman and then Hela, you feel like you're safe to do so, do it. That's your plan B. And then he started winning. Because he changed his philosophy of how he's thinking about the deck. It's just a small little engine to complement the entire overcompassing deck and what it wants to do, but it's not the end-all be-all if you don't play it.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's like that multiple win condition type thing where you can use these different engines, which I love that word. Thank you for sharing. I learned something new today, so I'm going to go to bed a happy man. But yeah, I think that's great. I absolutely love it. And again, I loved the concept that you brought up about the not playing Nico, whether it's 70% versus 30 or 50-50 or whatever it is. The thing that I liked about your analogy, because the question I was going to say, is that too much of a brick of a card? But you brought up Professor X, which I definitely don't play that card as often as I'd want. I get it all the time when I use it, because I like Lockdown. I like playing those type of deck. But it's like, unless it's something's there, it's just like, this is too risky. It's not there. And sometimes I do it and I'm like, oh, that's great. They played Iron Lad, which drew, Devil Dino, and they've got a full set, and it's just, okay, well, I lost that lane. Great. And Nico, as far as being similar to Professor X in the regard of playing versus not playing, because it's either set up or not, the risk isn't there like it is for Professor X. So say like maybe you want to play it on 5 and it's destroy the next card and draw 2, and you don't know if you're going to get a card that works. It's like, you know what? Well, I've got a 1-cost card that I could play and still get something, whatever, and it's like not the end of the world. Versus Professor X, almost, you could lose a lane. So I really like that analogy and to bring that up. I don't know. I think you nailed it on that. And I think if people look at it as it's okay not to play, that's a big deal, or a good thing to think of rather.
Yeah, and I'm exaggerating a little bit on purpose when I did the 70-30%. I do think it's going to be closer to 50-50 in most games, realistically, because the opportunity cost of her being a 1 cost is so much bigger than a lot of other cards, where you're going to have an opportunity to play her more often than not. But it's easy for us as players to remember the negative things about our play, or the negative things about games, and just in life in general, I guess, rather than the positives, because you take those for granted and then you hone in on the negative stuff too much. Yeah. And it's easy to just remember, again, the 12 times I played Man-Thing when I should have played Stegron, or Darkhawk, I guess is a better example, because that's a deck that's kind of popping up now. And Man-Thing kept losing me games, I guess, but I made the wrong mistake of, playing him over and over again, beating my head against the wall, trying to make him work in areas where he shouldn't have.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly with you. And I think to wrap this thing up a little bit, I think we both, you've made me feel better about liking Nico, cause I hated her first. And then I was kind of like, well, I started warming up to her a little bit, started thinking about some decks. And then, we obviously were going to collab, talk a little bit about this. Again, Brad's article is going to be out on CCGHUb. It's either tonight or tomorrow, I think. Do you know for sure when it's getting posted?
I'm not sure. I assumed it was later in the week because of the fact Nico's coming out next week. But, never know.
Sometime. This, by the time you're watching this video, the article should be out there. So whatever. But I am stoked to play this card. I think that, like you said, it is being very undervalued right now. I think that, look, maybe you and I are going to be the two people in the corner, shouting that Nico's decent. And if we're wrong, I'll eat crow. That's fine. It is what it is. Well, it's not going to be the last time I'm wrong about something. So, I appreciate you coming on, writing this article, being willing to talk about the different decks that you put together. I think your thoughts on all of this are dead on. And I'm really excited to see the card get played, and for people to see this article and comment below and tell us either how insanely smart we are or how stupid we are, because there's going to be no in between. But go ahead. I was going to ask for you any final thoughts or anything.
I mean, there are better players than you or I, so they're definitely going to find a home for her to be the most efficient, and it's not going to shock me at all. But I'm happy to write stuff like this and kind of do little think pieces on the game, and I think there's a lot to be desired here. Like it's going to be a great card.
Yep, no, I agree. And again, all of Brad's thoughts, elaborations are all throughout this article. I highly recommend everybody go check it out. I'll have a link in the description below to go over to check out CCGHUb and this article. I mean, you're going to be doing some weekly pieces or something along those lines, I assume, over there?
Yeah, so I've already done 2 other ones so far, and they've all been week after week. My first one was, why didn't Captain Marvel move? Everyone's favorite question to ask in the Marvel subreddit. Yep. And kind of go over all the intricacies of, why the card moves, how the priority system works with her, and even showcase some examples from posts on the subreddit and answering their question as to why she didn't move. And then I have a premium article about America Chavez and her limited lifespan in the game in her current state.
Oh, that's one to check out, because I am very into, that's one of the conversations I really like engaging in with the America Chavez, and whether she's fine as is versus whether she needs to be changed. And is she thinning your deck, or is she making your deck more consistent? Like that whole sort of concept and debate. So definitely go check out Brad's articles over on CCGHUb. Again, thank you for coming by. You want to shout out your socials, anything once more?
Yeah, Bradcifer on Twitter, and you can listen to me ramble more about Marvel Snap on Can't Stop Snapping with Teddy Ninja, and Snap on Ego with Chris Bootman Boutte, all on everywhere you can find podcasts.
All right. Well, I appreciate you again in your time. Appreciate everybody for getting this far in the video. If you want to further support the channel, just comment below, hammer down that like button. Until next time, we hope you have a wonderful day.